This is Empire Sports Alliance, unfiltered. No fluff, no filters, just the real side of sports. We're talking athletes, coaches, agents, doctors, executives, the people behind the scenes who actually move the needle. From building careers to surviving the grind to winning off the field. This is where real conversations collide.
Welcome to another episode of Empire Sports Alliance Unfiltered. I'm Ronnie. I'm the wealth guy. Today's guest is Coach John Downing with Cumberland Football. He's a defensive line coach. Coach, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
I appreciate it. I'm definitely looking forward to talking a little bit, about the trenches, the way I feel like, football games are being won, so on both sides of the ball. But why don't we start with you, Coach, in terms of like your background, when you basically, how did you get involved in football, from an early age on? Maybe you played on your own, and then obviously in terms of like the coaching route, et cetera. So normally try to kind of like have the guests talk a little bit about their journey in terms of how they came up and, do what they do today.
Yeah,
Please.
awesome. I came up playing middle school ball into high school ball. It's kind of a late bloomer, as they'd say. I went to a school, Charlotte, that didn't have football when I was there as a student. That's when I started, was actually coming into my own. And so I played a little indoor ball while I was a student there. So that was quite an interesting experience, being the only person playing football on the campus, 25,000, but really had a good time. Stepped away from the game for a couple of years. Wanted to go back. So I joined, of course, everything I needed more tape. I talked my way into the 2014 NFL regional combines that they used to do in Atlanta. Obviously, it was rusty and they had some CFL workouts, and everybody was talking about, updated tape and this, that, and the third. So started playing for a local semi-pro team for a little bit, and I ruptured a disc in my neck and my back. I had a sedentary job at that point in time, and I think a lot of it was, sitting in the cubicle all day, then going to practice, and probably what it was. Never could really tell what it was, but it kind of forced me into coaching. I got started in arena ball with Carolina Energy, spent a season there. And then I ended up coming into Johnson C. Smith and HBCU in Charlotte as the assistant D-line coach that following season, or that fall, rather, in 2018. Continued to do arena and college, since arena's in the spring, while I was at Johnson C. Smith, and, did that for my two seasons at JCSU. After that, I was in-season coaching 10 months out of 12 in the year, which everybody knows in-season coaching is a little bit of a different grind. So I decided to step back from arena ball, go fully into college and just have college be my main thing. And, interesting fun fact about me and my journey, largely came up as an assistant position coach as a volunteer because I have a full-time corporate gig as well that I work simultaneous. Interestingly enough, my background is in finance. I'm currently a project manager as well.
There you go.
So still doing both full-time now, and
during your playing career, John, you were a defensive lineman yourself, right?
I was offensive lineman. Yep. Offensive lineman.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I got to pick.
So you definitely got some workouts in with the defensive line then, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Getting into it at Johnson C. Smith, they let me pick. They said, "What side do you want to support?" I said, "I was an O-lineman, but I like creating chaos and messing up plans." So I was like, let me go defensive line, and I've never looked back. I have coached some offensive line as well. My stop at Gardner-Webb in 23, I was the O-line QC there. I won a conference. So interestingly enough, my first year coaching O-line, my only year coaching O-line, was blessed to win a conference there, an FCS conference. So, I've interned with Jacksonville Jaguars in mini camp for 23, and also had an apprenticeship with the Steelers for first week of OTAs last summer. So that was a ball.
How was that? It must have been a pretty cool experience, I would admit.
It was amazing. And being able to be in the same room as Mike Tomlin and that full Steelers staff, and learning a lot. The D-line coach is a friend and mentor of mine. Interestingly enough, he's the D-line coach for the Jets now. Also Coach Dunbar is my guy. Who love him.
Yeah. He was with the Steelers. He was with us. He was then with the Steelers again. I think he's back now. Right?
Yep. Yeah, he's back with the Jets. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Wasn't he there under Rex Ryan as well?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe that was his first. And then we're excited about this staff too. Frank Reich, of course.
Yeah.
My head coach at Wingate University was his brother Joe Reich. So really great family. So we're pulling for the Jets this year.
Oh, I love
I'll
to hear
say
it. I've been
I'll
doing
say
it,
we're
you know,
reluctant Jets fans.
that will be a journey as well. I can tell you from 40 plus years of experience in terms of rooting for the team. So,
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
think about it, before last time the Jets won a Super Bowl, there was nobody on the moon just yet. That happened later that year. So
right.
just to put things in perspective, but that's okay. I
Yeah,
certainly hope Frank Reich is going to do a good job with Klubnik. I think that's actually not a bad draft pick that
yeah,
they had there. I mean, I know they traded up in the 4th round, but who knows? But
yeah,
from your experience in terms of talking about coaches, what were
yeah.
who were some of the coaches that had a big impact in terms of you developing yourself as a coach, etc.? Anybody in particular, or a couple of folks that come to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, Travis Knight at Wingate, he's the full-time D-line coach there that I assisted.
Yeah.
Obviously Coach Dunbar I referenced already, phenomenal dude. I call him one of one. Not only is he the 1% of the profession at that highest level, but from a human being standpoint, he's a 1%er. We connected over Instagram, believe it or not, many years ago, actually
Hey.
COVID 2020. And my wife is from Pittsburgh, and so we'd go up and visit. And usually it was in the off season, and he'd invite me and her to grab a cigar with him, and
Yeah.
got to meet his wife, and now we double date whenever we were in Pittsburgh. Just a phenomenal dude. He really is. We talk probably every couple weeks. He was responsible for helping me get up to Pittsburgh for OTAs in 25. So that was an awesome experience. Brenton Buckner for when I kind of interned with the Jags in minicamp in 23. Phenomenal guy. Got in contact with him, interestingly enough, Facebook, and sent him my resume, told him I'd love to intern for him. And he, on Facebook Messenger, he said, okay, I'll set it up. And, going into it, I hadn't heard, and we hadn't been on the phone or anything. And I was like, okay, well, telling my wife, I was like, well, I might be going. I might be, I don't know. I didn't know any details or anything until the day before I left. And I was like, okay, well, it's for real. I'm going down. So, fortunately, I already had a place to stay. I spent a season at Edward Waters in Jacksonville, Florida. So I got some buddies down there. And, I was able to stay with them while I was there for the week. But just awesome guys, that are really, really open, not necessarily gatekeepers, as they say, and that's kind of I'd say there's fewer of those type of guys than should be. You know what I mean? So
Really? So you're saying
no,
there's a lot of coaches that are more gatekeepers versus open to hey, bring in new
yeah,
blood, showing
yeah.
the ropes and
Yeah,
stuff. Okay.
in my experience, in my humble experience, I've seen
Yeah.
there's quite a few. You'll get a lot of no's, but there's a couple yeses you'll get, and they're really good
Yeah.
dudes. And Brian Baker, a former NFL coach, I interned with Charlotte, my alma mater. He was really great. Wanted to allow me to come in and work, and I almost got to volunteer for that season at Charlotte. I was working a corporate job at the time that it didn't work with my schedule, unfortunately. But I ended up back at Wingate under Joe Reich, and we had a record-setting kind of a dream of a season. We had 60 sacks, 141 TFLs that year. We went the farthest in the playoffs that Wingate's ever been, and finished with the highest top 25 ranking in program history. We had the second-ranked defense overall that year. So, God had other plans for me, but
Yeah.
I really enjoyed working for Brian while I got to, and, still talk to him as well every now and then. And, so really, I've been blessed and fortunate to be around some great rooms with some guys who know football and are really good coaches as well as human beings.
And what keeps you passionate about coaching defensive line? I mean, you'll be open to do other, I would imagine, if that's,
Yeah,
offensive coordinator,
100%.
etc. But, what's the
100%.
passion?
My passion is getting after the quarterback and teaching guys to get after the quarterback. I'm trying to replicate that brand of 60 sacks, but of course, we were really lucky that season. I mean, there was me and Travis. This was after I'd come back after running my own room for the first time. And, you had two guys who could independently run the room, who genuinely got along. There were no egos, and, learning from each other, working with each other. And then you have to be incredibly lucky to have 60 sacks. We had 12 in one game, and 3 of our starting 4 were double-digit sackers on the season. So, I'm hoping to install that in Cumberland, and we're working hard, and
Yeah.
but we love it out here. Coach Mathis, my head coach, phenomenal human being. We have transfers who came in that we thought they might be one and done, but they didn't want to leave because they like Coach Mathis, and I like to say. They like my coaching style as well. I'm a guy. I don't take myself too seriously. I'm pretty even keel. I like to have fun with my guys, and they know it. I'm kind of like big bruh, so.
Let's talk about that for a second. What is your
Yeah.
coaching style? I mean, I know they're different ones, but what is yours?
Yeah, I'm one of the ones I tell my guys early how they can always come to me if they have an issue, and myself open, no judgments. I try to
Yep.
cultivate a room where everybody, from whether you're a freshman or walk on, feels confident they have their voice. I'm a project manager by trade in my corporate
Yep.
arena. My dad was a private practice psychologist. My mom was a speech pathologist. So I like to tell people I believe in the psychology of coaching, and mental health has been so destigmatized finally. And I tell my guys all the time, I tell them the background about my parents. And, I tell them I was one of the ones that firmly believed mental health is wealth before it was a cool thing to say. I lived it. I grew up in it. Seeing dad having to take emergency calls sometimes and things of that nature. So, and then, you have to practice what you preach, of course. So just, and I tell my guys every day I love them, you know what I mean? And I like to have fun with them, but when we get after it, we have to get after it, and I come into a room and, I'm not one of those old school coaches by way of, and it works for a lot of coaches where, on 10 right away. But the way I view it and the way I coach it and have always coached it is, if I'm on 10 100% of the time, some of the kids the way they are now, it just goes in one ear and out the other. Now, if I'm on 10 when I gotta be, if we're messing up, it means a lot more because I'm not always
It has more meaning to it, right? Yeah. Yes. Isn't that the same thing in a corporate environment? Like, the person that's always yelling and screaming, it's like, okay, when he's yelling and screaming or she, it doesn't come across the same way. So, but when you raise your voice actually a little bit, they know it's not good.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't come across as genuine either. And,
Sure.
I'm always asking my guys about their personal life and what's going on with, we had a bunch of transfers coming away from their relationships and family at home. We had some guys that were really going through some stuff last year. And, at the end, I always ask at the end of when we do exit meetings of every, season or spring ball, one of the questions I ask them is there anything you feel like you're not getting from me that you need or that you would like to get from me? And I ask my players, I asked my student assistant that, so my student assistant, my job is to I told him my job is to help get you ready to coach. And so I want that kind of feedback as well. I think the only knock that I got in that interview, that the exit interview that the kids do with my DC last year was I could be a little tougher on them sometimes, you know what I mean? But, so we've definitely.
So you're almost like you were too nice. Okay.
Yeah. And admittedly, I kind of learned that about myself because every year I take stock about what could I've done better this season, like I'm sure all coaches do, and one of the things I told myself is I didn't accommodate for, my first year at Cumberland, I came into a situation where 70% of the room was returners and a lot of upperclassmen, and then that following season, and a lot of the issues or if people are slacking off or whatever, it would be handled before I even had to handle it, right? But last year it was the flip side of that, and we had a bunch of transfers and then freshmen also, and we were about 70% new.
Okay.
So we didn't have that kind of established leader in the room, and I just, we still went 7-4 and did a good job and things of that nature. We just, weren't dominant like I thought we could be, and part of that was we were room still looking for that. Who's that guy going to be that guy to step up, So
in a situation like that, if you have a squad like this, how do you find that leader? Do they normally race to the top in their own way somehow? Is it on the field? Is it verbal? How do you know? And how do you then identify that and obviously focus on it, basically having your kind of coaching on the field? How does that work? How do you see it?
Yeah. It was a situation and like I said, once we snapped in the spring, I was not that same guy they were used to that was a little bit more laid back in demeanor.
Yep.
Because we were still looking for that guy who was going to step up. And, through kind of me putting my foot down, guys naturally kind of rose to the top, like you're saying. And we had a situation where we had a returner who started my first season here. He ended up, going to scout team and he was about to hang it up. And I told him, be patient. Yep. All it takes is 1 week. About week 4 or 5, he gets the start and he just goes crazy the rest of the season for the most part, doing everything, becomes a team captain. And every year I award one of my guys with D-line room MVP, voted on by their peers. I had no say so, and he won hands down. It was a runaway. It was JT. So, he kind of raised to the top. and kind of one of the ways I looked at it when I first came in, though, I used that corporate mindset that I had. I try to teach my guys to be self-starters. As a project manager, you give them ownership of certain parts of the project. And, when we had the upperclassmen my first year, I treated it like a project at work and gave them each piece's due and ownership. I gave them advice on some of the things they should do. And, it ended up culminating with players only led walkthroughs in the quad. And the upperclassmen were giving new guys quizzes that they created, they graded, trying to give them the keys to the vehicle, and then I'm also one of those guys, and a lot if my kids have ideas on how to make a drill better or more realistic for them, I'm down for it. I'll listen to it, and if it matches the game plan and what we're going against that week, I have no issues with switching up drills that I come in with for those guys.
Yeah. So from a coaching perspective, again, you're open-minded that way, right? In terms of you're open to new ideas. All right. Yeah. I think that's important. I think people, do like that. Now,
and I think active listening is really crucial for that as well. Active listening, being able to listen.
I think you get a way better understanding if that's in corporate or if that's on the football field in terms of who your player are, etc. I think it makes it easier for you to put them in the right situation to succeed. But yeah, in terms of developing these, elite defensive linemen, right? So what separates a good defensive lineman from a great one? And again, obviously, that's not just on a college level, just kind of what you've seen.
Yeah. Everybody talks about get off, which is important, of course, but I think hips and footwork, obviously. But I mean, you've got to be able to get the corner at some point, whether you step through or whether you hip flip, whether you're a 1, a 3, you know what I mean? You got to be, even those bigger guys inside, you need to be able to really open their hips. So I would say hips and ankle flexibility. That was kind of the secret to our sauce at Wingate and how we had that 60 is kept our guys on the field. And that's another saying in coaching, and half your job is getting the horses to the race. And one of the things we believed in pre-COVID, before I got there, the full-time D-line coach, Travis, who'd been there for a while, he required his guys to go to yoga twice a week, and then obviously COVID changed a little bit of that. They weren't offering COVID as part of the class at the gym or whatever, but we started putting them through PVC pipe stretching, especially our flush day Sunday after a game. Like that would be our indie circuit. They'd be doing PVC pipe squats and things of that, working on their hip and ankle flexibility. And we didn't have, to my knowledge and recollection, we didn't have any catastrophic injuries, and everybody finished the season. So I've kind of tried to bring that brand and style.
That,
You say what now? I'm sorry. Yeah. So
how do you practice that? How do you train for them in the weight room?
We just got to try and get plans that will translate to on the field and trying to make them better, and try to get them loosened. One of the things that's unique about Cumberland that I really like is most NAIAs, it'll be an O-line or a D-line coach that has the program and runs the weight and the strength program. But Cumberland's set up in a very beautiful way. And we've got a full-time strength coach who has a couple GAs. So, across the street, we kind of rely on them to get them ready. But, trying to steal time, I'd say, like I said, with those PVC pipe stretching's great. This spring, I've given a couple guys, especially some of the guys that may need a little bit more, my 6'4", 370-pound nose guard, we've given him PVC pipe to take home. I was like, it's $4 at Lowe's, but I got you. Here you go. The other thing we do with those PVC pipes that we did at Wingate was we put a piece of tape on it. So not only can you get your PVC pipe stretching in, but you work on some hand-eye coordination, that tapes the strike point, and you're tossing it back and forth. Also kind of employed that at Gardner Webb as a pre-practice drill where with our tackles and our centers about independent hand punch, so we'd have them doing that and some pre-practice work. So, but just kind of drill it and try to steal time, practice tends to fly by, and during Indy, we got to do other stuff, but you try to steal time when you can. And,
I hear you. I mean, these are some pretty big guys, right? So you're working with, these are basically the Hawks, right? So, how much of defensive line play is mental versus physical?
That's a great question. You're being asked to go in there and have a collision on every play. So I'd say it's 90% mental, but you still have to have the tools. You got to have the tool belt with you. So I would say it's very mental, but there are some physicalities to it, with walkthroughs and things of that nature, our guys need to be off their feet as much as we can, and we run a great scheme though, and I try to break it down and give some things, namiology, I know it's not a word. I tell my guys all the time I created that word, namiology, try to find the devices that work for them in different ways to plug things in. So scheme wise, install wise, our guys aren't asked to do a lot for the interior at least. They're kind of expected to go out there and play ball, and have fun.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do is bring all that together for them and make it easy and seamless to get the install down so they are playing at a mile a minute. But, again, it's one of those things with that contact down in there, you either got it or you can't. All those DBs, sorry to my DB coaches out there say, well, they can go in the trenches and I've been in some places we messed around with that. We had a quarterback do one-on-ones as a D lineman, and he did not win the rep either. So,
I think we had a couple of DBs on the show. Actually, two guys that played safety in the NFL. They never seem like they're too eager going up against offensive or defensive linemen.
No, no.
So I think that's not a good idea, just in general.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Quick twitchiness, and I would say balance, body control, and then hip flexibility, ankle flexibility. I can't say it enough. I do a lot of camps for high school kids too, and
yes.
that other coaches coach at, that other college coaches coach at, and that's one of the things that I think the more hip work you do, especially as they're developing in high school, the better off that kid can be. But I would say twitchy, balance of body control, especially when you do get that edge, you got to have that body lean.
If you look at today's game in the NFL, like who comes to mind that you're like twitchiness, just like off the charts, like quick?
I would say Donald, even though he's retired now. I mean, Aaron Donald.
Well, he's retired right now. I see, like now that they have Garrett out on that line.
Yeah, Garrett's. I think Garrett's a one-of-one athlete. T.J. Watt, I'd put in that same category, of course. Some of those guys. Yeah, Myles Garrett's unstoppable for the most part. Could you imagine a D line if Aaron Donald came back?
I think Aaron Donald, to your point.
Yeah.
I think obviously I'm a Jets fan, so now he's no longer with us. But yeah. I mean, if you look at it, that guy's coming from the interior, right? I mean, he's going up against, up the middle versus he's not coming from the outside. So I just find that's, fascinating from an athlete perspective. But when you recruit athletes, is that when you see the film, what's the first thing you kind of evaluating? Is it that type of stuff, the twitchiness, the quickness, or is it also the mental aspect in terms of having a motor? You're down and you're like, okay, you see body language you don't like. From a recruiting standpoint, how do you approach it?
Yeah. And that's a great question. It kind of makes me think of another trait I like to add is being able to get full lockout. There are kids in high school that either you have or you don't. And I tell my guys all the time, because I work on this with my guys, and we talk about full lockout. Thumbs at 12 o'clock. So our elbows could be fully locked to get that leverage point. But even when I interned with the Jaguars, that was one of the things Buckner was talking to a lot of the rookies about. You better get that lockout. And so, I would say that's another thing I look for on tape. Can he separate? Does he have the leverage to be able to disengage blocks? And I mean, you can have the best get off hips and everything in the world, but if you can't separate from blocks and have leverage, that's probably the trait that's going to make you the most. And I think a high degree of that is mental. It's not just instinctual, but a lot of times guys make it a two-step motion. But the way I teach my guys is as soon as we have force through the man, we need to press lock now, so we're not bench pressing linemen. And some of those guys that that can do that at a high level in high school would be the ones we want to get. Also, some of those guys who wrestle, you know what I mean, and talk about balance,
wrestling. You said
control.
I can't talk about getting off blocks and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of those guys know how to use their opponent's weight against them and their balance against them too. So we definitely like some wrestlers as well in D-line play.
And from a coaching perspective, what causes you to shut off the TV, the film? Like, I'm done with this. I'm not watching this tape. What pisses Coach Downing off when he sees stuff on tape?
I would say lockout's a big pet peeve of mine. To a certain degree, we can coach it, but it's something that also it's kind of one of those, it's a fine line, right? We can coach it, but there's some kids that just won't get it no matter how much we drill it. And that's why I like to say it's one of those, it's 50-50. It's either we can coach it or you either got it or you don't. It's like not every kid's the same, right? So,
Sure.
But I would say too, like and this advice for kids out there now, and whether you're a transfer, a high school student, and a lot of the camps I work that we do, and we talk about this, is we teach kids we tell them exactly what they should be putting on their tape, and splash plays first, big plays first. We get a lot of film daily, and you want your best plays at first because we've got a few minutes sometimes, or
Yeah.
if you got a 5-minute huddle tape and you've got a 0-yard sack. I have a mentor who was the head coach of the BC Lions at one point, and he's a Super Bowl champion, a Grey Cup champion, and he said, you had 7 sacks for 3-yard loss total. Doesn't mean you're a great pass rusher. It means you lucked into some stuff, and just like we had a receivers coach at one of those camps say, I don't want to watch a kid catch a 5-yard out and get tackled first clip. You know what I mean? Like, so put your best plays up front. Sacks, TFLs. Tips, PBUs as a D lineman. And we got good at that last season, recognizing screen. My 6'4", 370-pound nose almost picked one off, and he tipped into an interception on another one. So
that's pretty. So again, those are the plays. I think that's interesting you say that because, we have, again, interviewed several people that, maybe they were in camp, they went to the CFL and all that stuff, and all they're talking about is putting together tape. But again, to your point, the advice would be highlights first. Like, give me 5, 6 top plays you have. Again, for you, sacks, obviously tackle for losses, all that stuff before you go into the other. How long do you even watch a tape for somebody that wants to be recruited?
I'd say the average now is about 5 or 6. They don't have to be 20-minute clips.
Yeah,
5 or 6 minutes,
just quick.
Yeah, and then too, like if you're DN, like and your scheme calls for you to drop, have you in coverage sometimes. You know what I mean? So
that'd be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, like so, and then I kind of follow the rule of thumb. I've been fortunate to head coach a few All-Star games, college All-Star games, and mingled with a few scouts. And there's a Raven scout said if he can do it once, he can do it again. If he does it twice, then it's a habit, whether it's a good or a bad thing. So that's loafs in practice, or killing that one-on-one bar, killing that double. You know what I mean? So I try to follow that rule of thumb. If I see it on tape once, okay, all right. It can be taught. If he does it twice, okay, that's a habit, whether it's a good or a bad thing, and kind of go from there.
Okay. And what advice would you give these athletes when they're attending the camp and all that stuff? Like, what's best for them?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
What advice would you give athletes, attending camps? Like, just, obviously come prepared. I get that, but what should they focus on?
Be coachable. Being coachable is a number one. Number two.
Yeah.
Be locked in. Like if I'm coaching one kid up and I tell him something, that's gems that another kid can apply to their game. So it's really, really important to stay locked in. Even though some of those camps are 7 to 4, they're long days, you still got to lock in, because if I'm not coaching you individually right now, you can still get the gems that I'm trying to drop to somebody else. And, and I tell my guys that in the film room. If I'm coaching a rep up on tape from one of our 1s, 2s, or 3s, and the scout team's in there, I'm telling them, hey, like you can get that same coaching, even though we're not watching you now.
Yeah.
That's something that you need to look at and kind of try to emulate.
Yeah. No, that makes it. Again, you guys talk from a coaching staff perspective. You guys have conversations around that, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you need a good mix of players. Like you can have the high end, like superstar guy, but you also need other guys that, again, they're just, kind of fill in, certain roles, right? I would imagine.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And there will be games where you're just not hot, but somebody else is, and my guys know I like to ride the hot hand. I try to keep the reps evenly distributed as much as I can, but somebody's hot, I'm gonna roll with the hot hand, you know what I mean? And, my guys all love each other, and that was really fun last season, especially in the back half of the season where, they realize if somebody's cooking, we're going to let them cook. And, maybe next game I'll be the guy who's cooking, you know what I mean? And I mean, not to write themselves off for that game, but they understood kind of the rotations I had and why. And,
and we're going to talk about that, but that kind of goes into like from your coaching style and developing that team culture where basically it's like, hey, even though I'm not having my hottest day, I'm happy for the guy next to me, that has a great day, right? So I think if you can create that from a team perspective, because it's still a team sport, you're not playing tennis. So
yeah.
What's the biggest adjustment from these guys, from high school to college? Is it just a difference of the speed of the game, or what do they face from an adjustment perspective? High school.
Yes. I'd say biggest thing, not being a big fish in a small pond anymore.
Yeah.
And then a speed of processing thing, K and D, key and diagnose is another big thing for 'em, you know what I mean? And kind of also just the structure of, being a college student and a student athlete, and for some of them being away from home for the first time, all of that kind of rolls into one, and sometimes during meeting times, I'll cut the tape off and say, here, hey, it's a brother check in. How we doing? And,
Right.
and just talk to the room and try to get some organic conversation going that way.
Yeah. Cool. So again, now you have that, room again, you have your team and all that stuff, leadership, team culture. I know we're coming back to it. We kind of talked about it already, but in terms of like, how do you build that accountability, within your defensive line kind of room, what defines leadership?
I feel like, that's a great question. What defines leadership? Obviously, somebody who's coachable. You got to be able to
Yeah.
lead yourself before you lead your group. And guy who's doing the right things, who doesn't miss stuff, shows up to shows up to stuff. And a guy I could trust. I don't have to ask where he's at. Even some I have in the past was at a place where I had some guys I had to call an hour ahead of time just to make sure they were up. And
I'm sure that makes you real happy, doesn't it?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I think being accountable for yourself first and then being able to lead others, and so I'd say that's paramount and chief in the leadership aspect, and so, yeah.
Do you think that's just natural that somebody has leadership ability, or you think that's something that can be developed?
I think it's something can be developed for sure. I think if you're in the right environment, somebody who may not be may not be talkative, and you inspire that growth or put them in a safe setting, and they come out of their shell a little bit and kind of come out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And first time, maybe it feels great to them, and okay, they feed off it now. So that's why I feel like paramount first is setting that environment up, enabling that environment.
Yeah.
And I like to think that that's how I've been able to do that. And, and I mean, one of the highlights of my career was last season we had a transfer who came in and he was graduating, and senior day, he asked the head coach, can I have the D-line escort me up? And, that was, I've never had that before, but it was something else to hear on a loudspeaker and, escorted by the Cumberland University defensive line, who he felt like brothers were since day one. It was kind of like, okay, well, I'm doing something right, and I didn't have anybody transfer out, which in the nature of sports today, especially college athletics today, that's doing something, I feel like.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what's your take on that? NIL, transfer portal, all that stuff.
Transfer portal is necessary. It's a necessary evil, but and it's kind of taking over the game, of course. NIL, we haven't really seen too much at our level at the NAIA. I think there was a basketball player on our team that had it. However, our university has embraced it. They work with NIL collectives that can kind of match guys with donors. So, but it hasn't kind of taken over NAIA yet. Obviously NAIA is more often smaller schools. I don't know if the budgets will ever catch up for NIL, but it does make recruiting tougher now though, because if you get that guy who's a tweener, maybe he's looking at a school that's going to take care of him, even if it's a small NIL thing. And, and then we have some kids who aren't part of that NIL conversation. They come take a visit at our school and they try to sit down. Yeah. What am I getting? It's like, wrong place for that, so.
I mean, it works both ways, right? So
yeah,
you can
for sure
potentially benefit from it too, right? So
for sure. And we've seen, some of our kids get misinformed and leave and try to make that splash or jump at an FBS that aren't ready to, and they're being advised by people in their circle. I had an all conference guy my freshman year that transferred out, and ended up at a D2, not a bad D2, but he thought he was going to go get NIL money at an FBS, and it just didn't pan out for him, So, there's a lot of that.
It offers opportunities as well as challenges. So
yeah. And it's to the point where you've got to re-recruit your own roster every year, and but as long as you do the right things, I feel like you get the retention. You know what I mean? And part of that is it's a give and take. So
yeah. No. So let's switch over a little bit. I mean, obviously, we talked about high school. We talked about college. Defensive football today. How has offensive football changed defensive coaching?
Wow. Obviously, defense.
And we could talk NFL level now at this point. That's just like what you see, not just your own experience, but yeah.
I feel like for the most part, especially at the next level, it's going a lot more passing. based, and it's not
Yeah.
that ground and pound them. There's teams, of course, right? But and you got to be ready for everything. You got to be ready for, of course,
Yeah.
defense is such a reactive thing, But I will say this, not to offend anyone, or hopefully not. One of the things I love about the NFL,
It's not always easy, John.
yeah, yeah. One of the things that I love about the NFL is everybody's got the same salary cap, right? And it's how well do you draft and develop? How great is your front office? If you think about the amount of blowouts in the league over the last couple of years, with the exception of a few, you could probably count on one hand, maybe two hands, right? In college, you got the naturally the FBS versus FCS games. I've been in a few of those, and those games they get out of hand. They're like the arena football scores I used to coach in, and I just feel like, that's one of the things that makes the NFL so exciting to watch. So I'm one of those college guys. I've had college coaches ask me, "You're such an NFL dude." Like from a spectator and fan standpoint, I was like, I really am, like, and then being able to be in the same building as those athletes before, like, it's just different. So those guys are built different and great from an athletic standpoint, from a God-given talent standpoint. It's fun to watch those guys and go through meetings and things of that nature. So that's another reason I enjoy it so much.
Yeah. So how do you, from a preparation perspective, how do you prepare for quarterbacks who can both like throw and obviously, run as well these days? How do you prepare for that on a defensive side? What do you see around the league as well as in college?
A lot of talk about cage mechanics. Got to keep them in the well, and that's something we talk about a lot, especially, knowing the way, obviously you do your homework on your opponent. We know, okay, he's a dual threat. What does that mean? Better not let him get out of the pocket. Keep him in the cage, and we talk about the job of our interior D lineman versus the job of our edges, don't allow us to see area escape, things of that nature. So really talking about cage mechanics and practicing cage mechanics, a lot more rodeo drill that week, probably, things of that nature, make sure we're going off the upfield shoulder, and it is such a thing. It is a really big thing in today's game, right? And, that was one of the things I was really blessed about being able to see when I spent that week in Pittsburgh in OTAs. And Tomlin had what he called power hour, and he would have, some of the entry-level coaches and different position coaches come up with presentations on a topic in football that you would give them. And it was just to create organic conversation about those topics. And one of the days I was there, first one actually for power hour was quarterback mobility. And they had an offensive coach talk about how do we utilize it, and the defensive coach talking about how do we neutralize it. And, and especially being in that conference with Pittsburgh, having Lamar.
Yeah, they got Lamar Jackson there. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So, it's very, very relevant, in today's game. So, and so, yeah, you just got to prep it, drill it, more and stress things that, especially with the course of practices, how everything's so accelerated in different things. What are your everyday things that you got to touch on different days every week? And what creeps into that prep week a lot more is a heavier emphasis on cage mechanics.
Yeah. So I got another question there in terms of my philosophy is more in terms of, and we talked about it offline, winning in the trenches, right? I was always of the opinion, if I can run the ball and I can stop the run, I can win the game. It's pretty simple in my opinion, because again, obviously you control the time of possession, etc. Why is that a philosophy that today is not working anymore, or is it working? Do you think people coming back to it? I see a lot more fullbacks, coming back into the game, stuff like that. What is your take on that? Your philosophy, you're the head coach. How do you want to run your offense?
Yeah, there's a fine line you got to find between being able to ground and pound or playing it. Are you doing it too much though? Are you playing it safe? Are you, but I would say the biggest thing, we always tell our guys, you got to kill the run before you can defend the pass. And, well, there's teams that'll do it till you stop it. And those are long days typically, and so I think that there is kind of a comeback for it, and I've come up with coaching.
I mean, that's still the truth.
Guys. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying I think that's still the truth. You have to defend the pass first. Stop the run first before you just worry about the pass itself, right?
For sure. And, I've been blessed and come up with on teams with offenses that do like to ground and pound, like when I was coaching arena ball, Coach Bryson we had a running back that scored 10 touchdowns the day he graduated from Emory and Henry, as a running back and running those in, it's not something you see in arena football very often, right? So
Yeah.
he was definitely one of one from that regard. Bryson used to like to hand it off and hit the edges, and I mean, how do you neutralize a good D-line perimeter runs, and that's one of the good things. That's one of the things I've also been a victim to, like that year at Wingate when we were setting records for the program, a lot of them said, okay, we don't want to contend with their D-line, so quick game perimeter runs is what we got a heavy dose of, especially late in the season, and so that ground game is important because, like you said, in close games, it'll salt them away, and but you also can't when you only got a 1-score lead, you can't just try to salt it away for a quarter and a half. You still got to be able to attack and go get it. But
it's situational. I just think about that Denver Bronco playoff game at the end. They're up 7-0. It's 4-1. I think it's a bad decision to not go for the field goal there, especially since the weather. But that's me. I'm a Jets fan. No offense to the Broncos. But when you run the play then, and now you have your backup quarterback running to I don't understand the play call there. If anything, I put in a fullback and try to go up the middle or do a fullback dive, something like that. Why is it? I'm just wondering, as a fan, from an audience perspective, why am I so wrong thinking that I would run a play like this? Or am I?
No. I think the average fan wants to see points, and that's what everybody's trying to get to. And it's boring to watch somebody pound it up the gut a bunch. From a casual fan perspective, right? And I think that's kind of that's like, I love watching preseason games. A lot of fans don't. Like, these are the guys that are fighting for their NFL lives. You know what I mean? So kind of a purist in that regard.
I agree 100%. Yes, that's interesting.
Yeah, but there's not. 100%. They're usually low scoring, so the casual fan doesn't care to see that. So
they can be fairly low scoring as well, But it's still, again, there's guys fighting for their job, basically, because again, that's their career. So let me do this, John. So towards the end, I normally have a bunch of I call them rapid fire questions, right? That just in general talk about defensive linemen, etc. So. Let's start with this. What's your favorite defensive lineman of all time?
Ooh, I'm a classic man, so I think Reggie White. That hump move was unstoppable.
There's more than one.
Yeah, he was one of one, and I'd say Julius Peppers.
So you going Reggie White?
Reggie White, and I think Julius Peppers was in that category too. And what's fascinating to me about Pep is he was notoriously did not work out well. He was at UNC. Like, I read an article about him. He splashed water on himself to make it look like he was actually doing work in the gym. So that was all just man strength, and I've got a couple of guys that can do the Reggie White hump move. We're trying to work on it and kind of, I've showed them tape on it. Of course, they were blessed to watch Reggie White in person or live on TV. So, I've been showing them the tape, and I got 2 or 3 guys that can do the hump move. We just got to perfect it a little bit. So yeah.
That's cool. What's the best game you've ever coached?
I'm sorry, what was the best what?
Best game you have ever coached?
That would probably be the Tusculum game, the 12-sack game while I was at Wingate. It was tied for the second most sacks in a D2 game in history. We thought we could have had 15 or some pretty bad holding calls we got. That would have been the record, I think. So that was the first and only time Coach Wright gave the game ball to a position group and actually gave out a game ball. So that was awesome to see and be a part of.
That's right on. What's the toughest offense to prepare for? Type of offense?
Lindsey Wilson. They had. I likened it to the Colts when they had Peyton, Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, and Edgerrin James. They had a back who broke the program record for season and game yardage, and it happened to be against us. Was the game yardage one? And I mean, first play from scrimmage, we missed the TFL, and it was 80 yards out the gate, and that was his second from depth. He ran, and then you try to cloud the box, and then they had these really great pass catchers on the outside and the perimeter, so they hit them to spread us out again, and hit us with their feature back, their bell cow. So Lindsey Wilson, yep.
There you go. Yeah. What's your favorite drill during practice?
I like the Buckeye drill. I learned from Coach Dunbar. I do that a good bit during pass rush. I like pass rush box. I like the hip gauntlet that I learned from Wingate. The bag T drill is what I call it. There's another one I got from Wingate, Travis Knight. Those are some good ones to get our pass rushers ready. But, obviously a good classic standby is a 6-point explosion. Got to do that to press and lock. I have something called a block destruction box we did at Wingate a lot. That really kind of trains that press lock once we have force through the man. So those are probably my 4 favorite drills.
Nice. All right. What's the most underrated quality in a football player, in your opinion?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a tough one. I would say even keeled, not being able to be too high or too low. Being able to get pumped up, but also understanding that there's ebbs and flows. I think that's super underrated. And I've had a few gamers in my career that they seem like they're just like this all the time, and I've had D coordinators like, "What's wrong? They look like they don't care to be here." I'm like, "No, I know my guys. I just know that's his demeanor on and off the field, and like he's flipped the switch. He just may not look like it, but
yeah." Good. Hardest position on defense besides defensive line?
Besides defensive line, I would have to say, I'll be partial to the box. I had to say backer. Being able to run east, west, north, south.
There you go. You weren't going to go cornerback?
Like you said, I think you said on defense.
Well, okay. Oh, yeah, no, I said corner. Sorry, corner. You said linebacker, right?
Cornerback. Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, being able to run all day. I'm a big guy, so, running all day, that's, those skinny guys.
No. I think the cornerback position is really hard to play. Everything is so reactionary. So,
yeah.
Last one, Coach. One piece of advice every young football player, should hear.
Run your race. Run your race, especially in today's world with all the offers and NIL and that. Number one, social media is not always real, right? Those may not be committable offers, but and this is something even us as coaches looking to grow in our careers. Run your race. Everybody's journey looks different. Everybody's journey looks different. So, don't compare yourself to your teammate with 20 offers,
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, look, Coach, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you giving us a little bit of insight in terms of the defensive line.
Yeah.
Again, defense in general, I always think it's so underrated in terms of it's not talked about enough, but I certainly appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it, and great show you have here, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you.